The look on my wife's lawyer's face when he saw that 99-year lease, I wish I'd recorded it. Sambra was sitting there, smirking, already spending the $4 million she thought those properties were worth. She'd spent 30 years thinking I was just a simple man she could outsmart, a workhorse she could put out to pasture once she'd harvested the hay. But she forgot one thing. I built this empire brick by brick, and I knew exactly which stone to pull to make her side of the wall come tumbling down. To understand why a man like me would do something so calculated, you have to understand that I didn't just lose a wife. I lost the illusion of the family I thought I'd spent my life protecting. I'm 68 years old now. For 40 of those years, I've had grease under my fingernails and a dull ache in my lower back. I started Miller Construction with a rusted-out Ford F-150 and a set of hand-me-down tools. I wasn't looking to become a mogul. I just wanted to make sure my wife, Sandra, and our daughter, Megan, never had to worry about a light bill or a grocery run. By the time I hit 50, I transitioned from framing houses to developing commercial real estate. I bought 2 specific lots in the heart of the downtown district, 114 Oak and 220 Grand. At the time, they were nothing but derelict warehouses, but I saw the vision. I spent 3 years of my life and every penny of our savings renovating them into high-end investment properties. Today, they're worth $2 million apiece, easy. The first crack in the foundation of my marriage didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion. As the money grew, Sandra's memory of where it came from seemed to fade. I remember a charity gala we attended about 5 years ago. I was wearing a tuxedo that felt like a straitjacket, shaking hands with city council members. I overheard Sandra talking to a group of her new friends, women who spent their days at the country club and their evenings complaining about the help. One of them asked what I did, and Sandra laughed, a light, dismissive sound that cut deeper than any blade. "Oh, Arthur, he just plays with dirt and rocks. I'm the one who handles the lifestyle side of the Miller brand." She didn't see the man who'd worked 20-hour shifts to keep us afloat during the '08 crash. She saw a bank account with a pulse. That should have been my wake-up call, but I kept telling myself it was just a phase, or maybe the stress of me being at the job site too much. I tried to retire, thinking if I gave her more of my time, things would improve. Instead, it just gave her more opportunities to show me how much she looked down on me. I'd walk into the kitchen and she'd stop talking to Megan. They had this secret language of eye rolls and heavy sighs whenever I entered a room. I was the boring one. I was the old-fashioned one who didn't understand that Sandra needed to find herself at 65. The disrespect escalated from dismissive comments to outright betrayal. Last summer, I found out Sandra had been investing in a new business venture with a man named Julian. Julian was 35, wore linen shirts unbuttoned to his navel, and didn't have a lick of dirt under his nails. He was a wellness consultant. Sandra had funneled nearly $200,000 of our joint savings into his retreat center project without saying a word to me. When I confronted her, she didn't even apologize. She looked at me with pure coldness and said, "It's my money too, Arthur. You've been holding me back for decades. I deserve to have something of my own."
And that's when I realized they didn't see me as a husband or a father. They saw me as a resource to be depleted. Megan, my own daughter, sided with her mother. She told me I was being financially abusive for questioning the 200 grand. My own child, whose college tuition, wedding, and first home I'd paid for in cash. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't yell, I didn't throw things. I just went into my home office and locked the door. I realized that if I didn't act, I'd be left with nothing but a rocking chair in a nursing home while they spent the equity I'd bled for on wellness retreats with Julian. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I didn't file for divorce first. I needed the pieces on the board to be in exactly the right spots. I started making calls, not to a divorce lawyer, at least not at first, but to a specialist in nonprofit law and land use. You see, years ago, I had set up a private foundation, the Miller Heritage Foundation, intended to provide scholarships for vocational students, kids like I used to be who wanted to work with their hands. It was a small thing, mostly dormant, but it was the key to everything. I quietly negotiated a 99-year lease for the Oak and Grand properties. The terms were simple. The Miller Heritage Foundation would lease the land and the buildings for the sum of $1 per year for the next century. The lease gave the foundation total control over the properties, including the right to all rental income, which would be redirected into the scholarship fund. I signed it, notarized it, and recorded it with the county. Because I was the sole managing member of the LLCs that owned the buildings, I had the legal authority to do it. Then I waited.
The explosion happened 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning. I came home from a walk to find Sandra sitting at the dining table with a folder in front of her. She looked smug. "Arthur, I'm filing for divorce," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I've already spoken to Megan, and she agrees it's for the best. We've grown apart. I want the house, the Florida condo, and the 2 investment properties on Oak and Grand. You can keep the construction company, what's left of it anyway." I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. "You want the investment properties, Sandra? They're worth a lot of money." "I know what they're worth," she snapped. "My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, says they're the crown jewels of the estate. I'm going to sell them and invest the capital with Julian. We are moving to Sedona." I nodded slowly. "If that's what you want, Sandra, I won't fight you on the properties." She blinked, surprised by how easily I'd folded. She probably expected a month-long battle. She didn't know that I had already talked to my own lawyer, Ben, and we had prepared a settlement agreement that looked exactly like what she wanted, on the surface. The reckoning took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of a downtown office building. The air smelled like expensive stationery and desperation. Sandra was there, dressed in a designer suit I'd paid for, flanked by Mr. Sterling, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of a block of arrogance. My lawyer, Ben, sat next to me, looking bored. "Let's get to it," Sterling said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "My client is being very generous. She's leaving Mr. Miller the business and his personal retirement accounts. In exchange, she takes the primary residence, the condo, and the full titles to 114 Oak and 220 Grand. We've had them appraised at $4 million combined." "We agreed to the transfer of the titles," Ben said calmly. Sandra's smirk was so wide it looked painful. She leaned back, tapping her manicured nails on the table. "I'm glad you're being sensible for once, Arthur. It's a shame it had to end this way, but at least I'll have the security I deserve."
"Wait," I said, leaning forward. "Before we sign the final transfer, there's one small disclosure. It's in the addendum, but I think Mr. Sterling should read it out loud, just so we're all clear on the security Sandra is receiving." Sterling frowned, flipping to the back of the thick packet. He found the page, and as he started to read, I watched his face. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. First, his eyebrows shot up. Then the color began to drain from his cheeks, turning a sickly shade of parchment gray. He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw literally hanging open. "What is it?" Sandra asked, her smirk faltering. "Is there a problem with the taxes?" Sterling didn't answer her. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and professional begrudging respect. "Mr. Miller, you leased these properties?" "I did," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "A 99-year lease to the Miller Heritage Foundation. It was executed and recorded 2 months ago. The rent is $1 per year. The lease is ironclad, and it's a covenant that runs with the land. That means even if the title changes hands, say to my ex-wife, the lease remains in effect." The silence in that room was so heavy you could have carved it with a steak knife. Sandra looked from her lawyer to me, her confusion turning into a sharp, jagged panic. "What does that mean? What lease?" "It means," Ben said, picking up the slack, "that while you will technically own the buildings, Sandra, you cannot sell them to anyone who wants to actually use them. You cannot raise the rent. You cannot evict the current tenants who are now paying their rent directly to the Foundation's scholarship fund. You are essentially the owner of 2 buildings that will generate you exactly $1 each per year until the year 2023. And since you'll be responsible for the property taxes, insurance, and structural maintenance as the title holder, I'd say these properties are going to cost you about $80,000 a year out of pocket to own." Sandra's scream was guttural. She lunged across the table, but Sterling caught her arm. "You can't do this. That's my money. You're stealing from me." "I'm not stealing anything, Sandra," I said, standing up slowly. I felt taller than I had in a decade. "I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. You said you wanted the properties. You said you wanted something of your own. Well, they're yours. You can tell Julian that the wellness center might have to wait about a century." Sterling was stammering now, looking at the documents. This is bad faith. We'll sue to void the lease." "On what grounds?" Ben asked, tilting his head. "Arthur was the sole manager. He had the fiduciary duty to the LLC, and he chose to secure a long-term tenant for a charitable purpose. It's all perfectly legal. It's philanthropic. Are you going to argue in court that helping underprivileged kids get through trade school is a bad faith move? Good luck with that headline." The moment Sandra realized there was no undoing it, that she had played her hand and I had simply replaced the deck, she collapsed back into her chair. The arrogance was gone. The lifestyle she'd envisioned was evaporating right in front of her. She'd spent years treating me like a fool,
But in the end, I was the one who understood the value of the ground we stood on. In the aftermath, the divorce went through. She got the house and the condo, but without the $4 million in liquid equity she'd planned to strip from the investment properties, she couldn't afford the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. She had to sell the house within 6 months. Megan tried to call me crying about how unfair I was being to her mother, but I told her the same thing I told Sandra. I spent my life building a legacy. I just made sure that legacy went to people who actually work for a living.
I live in a smaller place now, closer to the coast. It's quiet. I still have my construction company, though I've handed the daily operations over to a young man who started as my apprentice 10 years ago. He's a good kid. He respects the craft. My daughter calls every Sunday now. She's much more polite these days, especially since she realized that the remainder of my estate is also tied up in that foundation. Funny how that works. People only start to value the well when they realize they're the ones who have to carry the water. I'm not bitter. I'm at peace. I'm just an old man who knows how to read a contract. And for the first time in 40 years, the only person I'm building for is myself.